First of all, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all our new attendees joining us today for the first time, and I'd like to welcome back our growing community of regulars who've been showing up to all our webinars. I'll just give you a very brief intro into everybody on the webinar today. My name's Jane Young. I'm with SmartWay2, and my background lies in all things digital, from shaping digital marketing strategies for brands and agencies through to running digital transformation projects and helping organisations set visions and roadmaps for the future. I also do a lot of writing and speaking about all things future of work. And I'm here today with our CEO, John Anderson, who brings almost 4 decades of experience to the table in growing workplace technology companies, including many successful acquisitions and exits. John makes regular appearances as a seasoned speaker at industry events, as well as being published in many journals. And we also have Martin Hiles with us today, the founder of SmartWay2. Martin has a strong track record of launching, growing and exiting companies in this space as well. And I challenge you to find a question around automated workplace scheduling that Martin cannot answer in our Q&A today, as he has such broad and deep experience in this field. So today we're here to talk about disruptive design for workplace experience innovators. This might sound like a slightly unusual topic. There's a good chance you haven't heard of disruptive workplace experience design before, but you showed up anyway. I can only assume this is because you are currently or potentially a workplace experience innovator. So whether you're in facilities, CRE, HR, IT, operations, you all have this in common. I'm guessing you're the sort of person who's up for disrupting the status quo with purpose to create something better. And this is a critical in-demand trait in 2021 and beyond, because we're at this pivotal point in history. We really have to carpe diem this thing, because if you're familiar with research around change, you'll know that change always follows a specific pattern. We start off in the status quo, it's familiar, comfortable, business as usual. Then something external disrupts us, which throws us into a period of chaos and volatility until we accept the change, learn from it, and create a new, higher status quo, a new normal, a new paradigm ready to be disrupted. And this means that right now, having lived through the chaos of the past year that isn't over yet, together we face the single greatest opportunity of our generation to positively disrupt the way we work, to create a step change in the quality of our organizations, the environment, and our lives. You can think of disruptive workplace experience design like a prism, only technically in reverse. All the different teams that normally operate on different wavelengths, when brought together by the disruptive design method, form the bright, focused light of an outstanding workplace experience. And I use workplace in the loosest sense of the word. You might notice that I included marketing on here. That's just a suggestion because marketers often have customer experience design expertise that's useful to apply internally. But you can add whichever teams you like into your version of the prism. What we're aiming for here is beyond incremental improvement, which is just doing the same thing a little bit better. We are shooting for disruption, creating something new that is so much better that we can't believe we did it the old way for so long. That, in a nutshell, is what disruption is all about. It's about interrupting business as usual. Buckminster Fuller put it beautifully. He said, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." So how do we do this? How do we build a new model of the workplace experience? A new model that's better suited to the realities of today and tomorrow? Well, before we get into the 3-phase method that I'm going to show you, which will answer that question, let's get a few things straight about what the realities of today actually are. Firstly, all roads point towards mass adoption of hybrid working. We've realized, lo and behold, that companies are actually just a bunch of humans trying to get things done. And we humans all have different life circumstances, different preferences, different roles. So when you start to see the world of work through this lens of individuality, applying a broad brush social norm like everyone 9 to 5 working in an office at an assigned desk seems at best suboptimal and at worst absurd. We've learned from the pandemic that the vast majority of people want to spend roughly half their time in the office and half at home. This is a consistent research finding. We've also learned that very few people want to work from home 100% of the time. And we've learned that there's a disconnect between employee and employer expectations. In fact, Microsoft listed 7 hybrid working trends in a recent report, one of which was this: leaders are out of touch with employees and need a wake-up call. Their report says over 40% of the global workforce is considering leaving their employer this year, and 46% are planning to move now that they can work remotely. So, organisations that don't pivot fast enough towards more human work patterns, including hybrid working, just won't retain their best people, let alone attract new talent or inspire them to do their best work. Then there's the looming collaboration crisis. Again, according to Microsoft, we are spending double the amount of time in meetings than we did last year and sending 40 billion more emails per month. If you saw our last webinar, you might recall an eye-watering statistic that the cost of meetings in just two countries, the US and the UK, stacks up to a staggering $457 billion each year. That's almost $500 billion. So it's the perfect storm of anxiety. Crazy amounts of time in meetings, drowning in email, working longer hours, missing social contact, economic instability, job insecurity, health worries, exponential change. All of this leads to what researchers call threat rigidity. Threat rigidity occurs when anxiety triggers a desire for control and a focus on yourself that leads to a go-it-alone mentality. So people become more risk-averse and less collaborative, less creative in a crisis, which is the exact opposite of what we need right now. This pulls directly against our efforts to boost collaboration and innovation. Just take a look at this chart. This is data from a law firm that was part of a Harvard study looking at 10 years worth of data on collaboration. And it paints a very typical picture. This is actually during the 2008 crash. It shows that the most collaborative workers grew their business and continued growing beyond the crisis. The mediocre collaborators declined during the crisis, but they did start to recover within a year. And the poorest collaborators hunkered down, stopped networking, guarded their clients, hoarded work, and as a result, their revenue contracted. And 5 years later, the poor collaborators still hadn't recovered. So the workplace experience needs to facilitate collaboration, increase trust, reduce anxiety, encompass mass personalization to cater for individual needs and circumstances. It must reduce waste, wasted time, energy, carbon footprint, budget. This is a complex challenge. But let's start with some basic assumptions. Firstly, the workplace needs to be adaptive. It must adapt to user needs that are continuously changing. We covered this in our webinar on preparing for the adaptive workplace, so I'll send you a link to that in case you haven't seen it yet. Secondly, utilization data is essential for optimizing an adaptive hybrid workplace. Because without this data on who's using what and when, whether it's room spaces, parking, classes, equipment, what mix of people are attending meetings virtually versus in person, without this, it's almost impossible to know whether your workplace experience is well configured for your current reality. So you end up making decisions in the dark. Utilization data is particularly important if you're currently figuring out the best way to reduce your real estate footprint, or if you're planning to keep the same footprint but reconfigure the space, perhaps adopt activity-based working. I imagine most of you will be looking to do one or both of these things to some extent, so you'll need data to reveal which spaces are over or underutilized. And thirdly, we can assume that the office and everything in it needs to be accessible on demand. Or in other words, your desks, meeting rooms, focus booths, equipment, services, whatever facilities people need for a productive day's work should be bookable in advance. Because if everything isn't bookable in advance, there's no way of generating accurate utilization data. There's no way of efficiently managing occupancy, so you'll potentially end up with big peaks on a Monday and nobody coming in on a Friday, or people showing up at the door only to be turned away. There's no way of automating safety procedures like social distancing, health checks, contact tracing. And of course, you can't deliver a world-class experience if you don't allow people frictionless access to what they need when they need it. Then there's the issue that I know many of you are grappling with, which is that most people no longer need an assigned desk. Organizations we're talking to are aiming for a ratio of 2, 3, 4, 5 people per desk. Other companies like Dropbox are taking a more extreme approach, shooting for 0 desks. They're seeing their future offices purely a space for collaboration and socializing. In fact, they're calling it Dropbox Studios. They aren't even calling it an office. So clearly, any great workplace experience must factor in all these elements. It must be adaptable, data-driven, and on demand. I know some of you here today are already using SmartWay 2 to solve these challenges, but if you're less familiar with what we do and you want to go into this stuff in more depth, for instance, managing who comes in when and touchless check-ins, automated social distancing, contact tracing, utilization reporting, and lots more, you can check out our other webinars, or if you'd like to speak to someone, you can request a demo via smartway2.com or feel free to contact me directly. So now we've established some key shifts that are underway, let's get stuck into the disruptive workplace experience design method. Because it's all very well having technology and data and strategies and tactics, but we need to manage all that stuff. We need to conduct the orchestra. And to do that, we need a framework, a scaffolding to support and galvanize our efforts. So disruptive workplace experience design is a three-phase process for activating change. It's inspired by the work of Dr. Leila Jora-Lewis, sustainability innovator, as well as a design thinking process many of you will have heard me talk about before. If it helps you remember the three phases we're going to go through, the acronym is ACT, A-C-T. So phase one is A, adoring the problem. That might sound a bit weird, but we can't underestimate the importance of getting excited by the problems that we're trying to solve, getting really curious about them and helping our teams do the same. Because our brains are wired to avoid complexity and discomfort. We all experience this resistance at times. So we need to push past that by immersing ourselves more deeply in the problem. And the more experienced we are, the easier it is to slip into this trap of expertise. You know, this assumption that I get this, I know what to do. Whereas in truth, the most obvious ideas aren't always the best. And things are always more complex than they seem on the surface. For example, many smart people thought open plan offices were a great idea to increase collaboration, only to find out that they can have the exact opposite effect. As Peter Senge said, today's problems are often yesterday's solutions. Likewise, no amount of well-being initiatives that treat symptoms of burnout will cure an underlying leadership problem that's causing the burnout in the first place. So we need to dig beneath the surface so we can avoid jumping to conclusions and to avoid focusing our efforts on sticking plaster solutions that treat symptoms rather than causes. Now you can do this on your own with a couple of colleagues in a big cross-functional group, but start by writing down a statement or question that defines the problem area that you want to tackle. For example, it could be very broad, like creating a transformative workplace experience in a hybrid working world. Or a little bit narrower, depending on your area of influence. For example, how can we give our people autonomy and trust while controlling building occupancy and safety? Once you've defined the problem, come up with a research plan that fits the resources, time and budget you have available. You might have employee engagement survey data, pulse survey data, third-party research, employee interviews, case studies, space utilization data. All of this, layered on top of the knowledge, experience and training each of you brings to the table, feeds the wisdom of the group. It fills everyone's brain with fresh content so they can have more meaningful, useful insights later on. Now, as you're immersing yourselves in research and data, you'll discover lots of things, lots of parts that constitute the problem you're looking to address. So start capturing and noting down all these elements, or nodes if you want to call them that, as they'll form the output you need for phase 2 of the process. Now you can do this by making lists of elements and parts, using sticky notes or a piece of paper for each one, using online tools, however works for you. In fact, it's important to remind yourself and your team that there's no right or wrong way to do this. This whole thing is a thinking exercise, so let it take you wherever it takes you without getting too hung up on whether you're doing it right. Now, you might want to start at a high level with big concepts. For example, here I've got autonomy, occupancy, safety, mental health, carbon footprint, commute, building security, job security, collaboration, and so on. And then drill down further and further into the detail that isn't visible at a high level, going as deep as you can to zoom in and out between your helicopter view and then into your worm's eye view, in and out. Then once that's done, you've identified all these bits and pieces that make up the problem. Then you can shift on to phase 2. C, connecting the dots. Now you generated lots of components, elements, nodes, things, whatever you want to call them in phase 1. So now it's time to start drawing connections between these parts. Now you can use all kinds of techniques for this, like systems mapping, identifying feedback loops, cause and effect diagrams. In fact, if there are any systems thinking nerds here today, you'll be on fire at this point. But let's keep things simple for now because we have limited time by starting with a cluster map. So just throw all your nodes down on a big piece of paper, or a glass wall or a virtual whiteboard, however you're doing it, it doesn't matter, and start arranging them in whatever way makes sense to you. identifying the connection points, drawing lines between nodes that connect in some way or influence one another. Now, during this phase of the process, you'll find you're creating an absolute mess, and you have to be okay with that. The objective is not to end up with a pretty picture that makes sense to a random outsider. You're not going to present this. Rather, the objective is to spark fresh thinking within your disruptive design group. It's a thinking exercise. It helps you reveal connections between pieces of the workplace experience puzzle that aren't obvious at the start. So once you've got a big, messy picture of all the parts and all the connections, you can start circling into connection points that had a key insight for you. Because it's at these connection points that you typically find the place to intervene with a creative solution that will have a disproportionately massive impact from a relatively tiny tweak. It's these points of leverage that we're after. Then finally, you can move on to the third and last phase of the method. T for test and learn. This is the ideation phase when you're going to come up with potential solutions to try out or to show people in order to get feedback. Now, it's easy to fall into the trap of getting stuck on your first idea or your first few ideas that you have at this point. But again, the most obvious ideas are typically not the best. So go into this by setting the expectation with your team that you'll all push through the complexity, push through the comfort zone and push past the obvious ideas that come out early on. You might want to set a minimum number of ideas per intervention point that you've identified, like 5 or 6, to help you do this. Also, be prepared to cycle back through previous phases. Chances are you'll have to dip back into your research. You might even have to redefine the problem area that you're tackling, reconsider the resources you have available. This doesn't have to be a linear process. You can and should loop back and forth. The goal is to end up with ideas you can prototype. And a prototype doesn't have to be a physical prototype. It can be anything that you can get feedback on. So a flowchart showing employee journey changes, an outline for a new training initiative, or it could be a hot desking or office neighborhooding pilot. Your aim is a minimum viable solution that allows feedback so you can test and learn. And that's it, a simple 3-phase method for working through complexity to activate change. Adore the problem, connect the dots, test and learn. And all that deep diving, all that adoring the problem, pulling out the nodes, connecting the dots, spotting the intervention points, rapid prototyping, makes everyone feel more fascinated by the workplace experience and gives rise to the sense of empowerment, of personal agency. And that's really important because without a sense of agency, we feel helpless and don't act. Paul Mitchell, the editor-in-chief of MIT Sloan Management Review, put it clearly. He said we, as in society, have reached a new level of angst. Taken together, today's attacks on our sense of personal power across all walks of life and our economy amount to a crisis of agency. And again, this is the last thing we need right now. Developing our sense of agency isn't the only unexpected benefit of using this disruptive method. There's a brain imaging study by Duke's University that showed that problem solving, which is the whole point of disruptive workplace experience design, actually buffers the brain against anxiety. According to 2019 research by Thrive Global, anxiety costs over $46 billion a year in the US alone. And we've already mentioned the knock-on effects of anxiety on threat rigidity and collaboration and innovation and success. So teaching your team or department, or even better, a cross-functional team, or even better, your entire organization, this simple 3-phase method, not as a one-off, but as an iterative, ongoing process, can have a profound systemic impact. If you attended our previous webinar, you'll have seen this diagram. It portrays a classic agile iterative process where you leverage utilization data to optimize the workplace experience. Well, now we can lay our disruptive design process on top of that to accelerate the speed at which we evolve as our comfort zones expand, our spheres of influence expand. So using this process, or your own flavor of it that you develop as a way to iterate and innovate the workplace experience, you can surreptitiously achieve the dream that we all talk about but struggle to make real, which is true cross-functional collaboration, where departments are no longer in silos but blend into one another around the challenges that they're tackling together. And that's not all. You can also achieve the other dream we've talked about for years but have struggled to make real, which is creating a learning culture. What better way to learn than to immerse yourself in all the components of a problem area and work through it with diverse colleagues? Now, most of you on this call right now are leaders, you're decision makers. And as great leaders, you'll naturally leap to thinking, how can I fix these problems for our people? As if it's your job, a top-down job. But I'd argue we need to move beyond this static top-down way and instead make evolving, adapting, and problem-solving everyone's job. In fact, the job is too big for it to be any other way. So when we use processes that have learning built into them, we can create lasting, positive change because change actually happens at an individual level. Everyone needs their individual light bulb moment. If you've read James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, he points out that too often we mistakenly believe that massive success and radical transformation requires massive radical action, when actually it's small, regular, consistent improvement that can have the most astounding impact. That's why habits have such a dramatic effect on the course of your life. By implementing new routines that are quite easy to accomplish, you create a system of compound growth. Or as James says, you get what you repeat. So I'd urge you to think about disruptive design as a thinking and doing habit, a routine. So before I hand over to our CEO, John, for Q&A, I'll leave you with one final thought. And that is that real transformation is what the ancient Greeks called metanoia, meaning a change of heart or perspective. People who experience for themselves a different way of seeing things are transformed with a new sense of purpose and a new way of being. That's what Einstein was getting at when he said, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. If we don't embrace tools and frameworks that help us see things in new ways, we risk getting stuck in a rut. And from that rut, it's unlikely we'll create a workplace experience that inspires a new way of being, a renewed sense of purpose, a better quality of life that is sustainable. And I mean sustainable in the widest sense of the term, doing things now that won't screw up our quality of life in the future. So I wish all of you well on your quest to create the perfect conditions from which a sustainable, inspiring workplace experience can emerge. And with that, I'll pass you over to our CEO, John Anderson, who's going to field your questions.
Oh, thank you very much, Jane, for your informative presentation. And I want to welcome over 1,700 people that registered for our webinar today, a new record for us at SmartWay. Thank you for your participation. And now we're going to take questions via the chat. You can enter them in and we'll try to address them in the few minutes that are remaining. And one of the first questions always is, will there be a recording of the video? And yes, we will be forwarding a recorded link to access the video in the next 24 hours after it's saved in the cloud. So with that, we'd be happy to answer your questions. Please enter them in the chat function. So I have my colleague Martin Howes with me as well. The first question is can you give me any unusual examples of innovating the workplace experience? Well, I'll start with one, and then maybe Martin, you can chime in. We've been implementing a lot of desk booking, office hoteling, or hot desking solutions around the world. And check-in is a really big feature that people are trying to figure out how to do with. With your mobile phone or QR codes or desk pucks on the desk where you can use your security badge. But one client in Europe took their QR codes and embedded them into their carpet tiles. So it was real easy as an employee came up to either, scan themselves in and claim that desk or confirm that they booked that desk and that they were checking into that desk. So, people are trying to weave things into the, no pun intended, the fabric of their workplace. Martin, maybe you have one to share as well.
The thing that strikes me, John, during this pandemic is the amount of integrations we've done with access control, but for very different reasons. Historically, integration with access control would just be to check the person into their desk, so they knew that they were using the resources that they were booking for. But more recently, with the pandemic, I've seen organisations revoking everyone's access to the building and only granting them access either when they've made a booking or even only when they've satisfactorily completed health screening. So that seems to be a very topical area at the moment, and organisations are taking very different stances on it.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Martin. Do you see and expect companies to invest in their workplace experience during after the pandemic? I mean, we're certainly seeing people do a lot of change to their floor plans and footprint, to encourage collaboration, but also to optimize, the utilization of space. And so we are seeing people renovate and spend a lot of money in those renovations to create the right work environment, as they need to have the right space for people to come back and use, and optimize the collaboration aspects of it.
Interesting point there, John. Jane made the example of Dropbox, I think it was, where they're doing away with traditional desks, and you would think that the need to make a booking would disappear with that. But funnily enough, I was talking to a client only this morning, and they're doing exactly the same. They're doing away with desks, and they're refurbishing the office to have just informal meeting spaces and different sort of touchdown areas where people can sit down and work. But because they need to control the number of people in the building on any given day, they've gone with the concept of building passes. So you have to book a building pass in order to get into the building on any given day. So, even if we take the desks and meeting rooms away, we don't necessarily lose the requirement to be able to book those resources.
Yeah, very interesting.
Huge, sorry, chiming that, huge investment, generally speaking, in digitization throughout the pandemic. I think most of the barriers that existed before have been brushed aside. So we've seen a lot of heavy investment on operations and digitization in all senses. IBM had a really good report on that came out a couple of months ago. So I think for sure people are willing to invest, and as well, I mean, it's a differentiator. The fact that people digitize quickly and make huge improvements quickly in a crisis means that those who don't will be further behind, because obviously the more you digitize, the faster you can move, the faster you can innovate in it, and the more you pull ahead. So I think anyone who doesn't is going to struggle, and also struggle with the fact that people now have an expectation that they will be able to work in a hybrid style and they'll be able to work from home. So if you want to keep the top talent and attract people, then I guess the investment is necessary.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Another question around is, how are companies using utilization data to improve the workplace experience? Well, we're seeing a lot around, companies wanting to control the percentage of people coming back into the office or on a floor plate. Maybe we only want 20% initially and then changing to 30. We also are just about to release a new module that will allow you to integrate with your access control system. One client we have is San Francisco based, and they were doing a manual questionnaire. The employee would travel all the way into San Francisco. They would manually fill out a healthcare questionnaire and hand it to the security guard. And the security guard would determine if you answered anything inappropriately and send you home, which didn't make them too happy if I commuted all the way in, or let you in, and they were manually tracking all of that. With our badge integration now, one is you'll be able to activate the card. Let's say John had a reservation for today, and it will allow me to use my security badge to access the building. If I didn't, it would not activate my card for the day. But also, more importantly, and once I've entered the building and using my security badge, it will send back a signal to us and tell us that you checked into your desk. And prior to all of that, the night before I'm coming to the office, we're sending out a healthcare questionnaire that you need to complete to confirm your booking. And if you answered anything inappropriately, have I been near someone? Have I had a temperature? then we'll cancel your reservation. So instead of that whole manual process, we have a completely automated process and controlling access to the building. So, that's been a big, area of concern for many of our clients around the world. Martin, maybe this one for you. Do you think QR code booking or NFC booking will be more popular when booking a space?
I would say so. Anything, after this pandemic that is a touchless experience, then I can only see that being welcomed and the use of it being boosted. There's also other technologies such as geofencing, where coming into contact with a Bluetooth beacon, for example, could take some of the actions for you. We've got some interesting functionality around that coming along very, very soon.
Another kind of several questions around the workplace and the needs to be adaptive, and how do we do that in practical terms. Maybe you can just talk about our rules engine and the flexible workflows that we can develop in that, Martin.
Sure, yes. The rules engine is a combination of features, the ability to create custom fields, control where and when and under what circumstances they appear. That can obviously be built into a custom form. And then graphical visualizations can be updated using graphical layers. Actions can be enforced using rules, and a rule can be triggered to validate data. The highest level of a rule we call an inline rule. So the moment you make a selection that is ultimately going to result in your booking being rejected, you're advised of that. We can obviously run a rule on save, also on delete, so you can stop people cancelling bookings after they should have arrived, maybe. And also on check-in, and that's very topical at the moment with regard to the health screening that we've been talking about. If someone arrives and they attempt to check in and they've not completed that health screening, then you can take the appropriate action. So if you combine all those features together, it does become very, very powerful indeed.
Yeah, great. Maybe there's a question around neighborhoods, Matt, and maybe you can add on to what you just said and talk about, neighborhoods is very popular these days.
Yes, neighborhoods. Prior to the pandemic, the biggest concern when adopting a move to agile working was to ensure a sense of belonging still for the staff. So whether they were booking a desk and going into the office, they could be guaranteed they'd be sat with members of their own team. So it became very common to configure neighborhoods, and put particular rules around them. So maybe you could book a desk in your own neighborhood up to 2 weeks in advance. Maybe, if someone from another team was looking for a desk for tomorrow and their neighborhood was full, they might be allowed to book a desk in yours and vice versa. There's been many variations on that theme as we've gone through the pandemic. We've seen the adoption of team days. So, the whole office is dedicated to a team on, every other Wednesday, for example. It is very, very topical, but the beauty of the neighborhoods really does allow the booking process to be much simplified. So when a user logs in using whatever device they choose to book through, they'll be taken directly to their home neighborhood, presented with the desks that they're allowed to book that meets their criteria. Maybe they need a docking station or a desktop PC. So it really does enhance the user experience and simplify the booking process, as well as all the other benefits that go around neighborhoods.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Question around our data centers. So we are a cloud solution. We use Amazon as our hosting partner, and we have data centers in the U.S., Ireland, and the U.K. because of Brexit, and Australia. So clients choose where they would like to, place their data. And it remains there. So maybe time for one more question. What's the best way to deal with agile hybrid workers and those fixed in the office at an assigned workstation? Well, there's a couple of ways to deal with it, and maybe Martin can chime in here too. I mean, one big thing, if you have permanent workers but they're not coming in all the time, the concept of what we call reverse hoteling, where you're allocated a desk and you have to book it because we need to know how many people have come into the space. But if you're not coming in, you're going to be away for a week or 2 weeks on holiday. You can take your permanent desk and open it up for an agile person to book it in your absence. So that's one of the ways to do that. But people are making their permanent employees book, because they're trying to track utilization on a floor or a building, and then we cut it off with our rules that Martin mentioned. You hit 20 or 25% capacity, then no one else can book a desk for that day or week. So the rules control all that in an automated fashion. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Martin.
Well, yes, in the current situation, we are seeing it being mandatory to book your own desk, even if you do have a permanent desk assigned, so we can deal with the social distancing, and that may prevent one of your colleagues from coming in, or if you're sat adjacent to a 3-seating area, we can take some of those desks out of service, and that obviously reduces availability on any given day. So we are seeing unused meeting rooms, for example, being repurposed as temporary workstations. And on that note, we often see that changing throughout the day. One of the biggest challenges organizations are currently having is providing space for people to get away from their desks and eat lunch. So we're seeing meeting rooms being opened up for people to eat lunch between 12 and 2, and obviously be suitably socially distanced in those meeting rooms. So lots of that taking place at the moment.
Great, thank you, Martin. So we see another question, and then we'll probably wrap it up. People are asking why, are people coming into the office? We haven't really shown you a product demonstration. We talked about some of the functionality around. We can create questionnaires or check boxes. We're seeing companies, okay, maybe you have to have your approval from your manager to book a desk tomorrow or next week. So there's an approval process we can build in. We're also building in additional questions around, why do you need to come to the office? Maybe it's, I need access to a printer. Maybe I'm working on a project with Jane and we need to get together. Maybe it's, I just need to get out of the house and the kids are bothering me. So, we've been building some additional questionnaires or things to check, to capture that information so that the company understands, what is the need driving you back to the office and controlling it. So there's a lot of ways to help manage that employee experience. With that, I think we'll wrap things up today. Again, we'd like to thank you all for attending. If you'd like to see a demonstration, you can reach back out to us and fill in the demo request form. And as we noted, Jane will be sending you an email with a link to the recorded webinar, which you can share with your colleagues. Again, thank you for your time and attention today. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.